What would you do if the dignity of someone you loved was stripped away in front of strangers on a flight thousands of feet in the air? This isn't just another story about an airline mix-up. It's the story of Evelyn Harper, a retired schoolteacher who boarded her flight with joy, ready to see her son, Marcus Harper, a man whose innovation shaped an entire industry. She had a first-class ticket in her hand, a gift from her son, a symbol of love and respect. But what should have been a moment of comfort turned into public humiliation when a flight crew, influenced by a wealthy couple's entitlement, pressured her out of her rightful seat. What they didn't know was who Evelyn was, and more importantly, who was waiting for her text message. One quiet message from a mother to her son would set off a chain reaction igniting a corporate storm, toppling careers, and sparking a movement about dignity and respect. But was the response justice or an overreach of power? Stay with us until the end, because the truth is far more gripping than fiction. And before we dive in, make sure to like, share, and subscribe so you won't miss the powerful stories we uncover every week. The morning light streamed gently through the tall windows of San Francisco International Airport, painting the polished floors with soft golden reflections. Travelers hurried past in waves, some with eyes glued to phones, others shepherding restless children, each caught in the rhythm of departure. But for Evelyn Harper, the 71-year-old retired schoolteacher standing calmly at gate B12, this wasn't just another trip, it was a gift she had almost refused, but one her son had insisted she accept. Her boarding pass trembled slightly in her hand. Seat 2A, first class. She had never flown first class before, not in her decades of teaching literature to teenagers, nor in the years she worked part-time at the public library to make ends meet. She had always traveled coach, squeezed between strangers, her knees brushing the seat in front of her, her elbows tucked carefully so as not to bother anyone. But today was different. Today, her son Marcus wanted her to fly like a queen. "Mom," Marcus had said on the phone 2 weeks earlier, his deep baritone steady but warm. "You carried me through a world that wasn't always kind. You worked late nights, graded papers until your eyes hurt, and somehow still had time to listen when I was scared about tests, or girls, or life. I need you here in Washington when I receive this award, and I need you to travel in the comfort you deserve." No arguments. Evelyn had laughed, a soft, incredulous sound. "First-class Marcus. I'm fine in economy. I've lived my life that way." "No, Mom," he had said firmly, almost pleading. "You raised me with dignity. Let me return it, just this once." And so here she was, ticket in hand, her heart buoyed by pride. Marcus Harper wasn't just her son anymore. He was the CEO of Nexus Innovations, a name that appeared in business magazines and technology journals. He was about to receive the Innovator of the Year award in Washington, D.C., a recognition for building the logistics software that powered airlines, shipping companies, and hospitals across the nation. But to Evelyn, he was still the boy who used to sit at their kitchen table, scribbling equations in the margins of his notebooks, his face lit by the single lamp they could afford to keep on late at night. The gate agent scanned her ticket with a genuine smile. "Enjoy your flight, Mrs. Harper." The words carried her forward like a blessing. She stepped down the jet bridge, her steps slower now with age but lightened by anticipation. Inside the plane, the first-class cabin unfolded before her like a quiet sanctuary, Wide leather seats gleamed under soft lighting, each with its own screen, its own neatly folded blanket, and a small bottle of water placed just so. There was a hushed elegance in the air, the faint scent of lavender mingling with the sterile chill of recycled oxygen. Seat 2A waited by the window. Evelyn slid into it carefully, her body sinking into the supple leather with a sigh she didn't know she had been holding. She set her handbag at her feet and pulled out a dog-eared copy of Go Tell It on the Mountain by James Baldwin. The book had been her companion on countless commutes and quiet afternoons. She held it now like an anchor, grounding her in a world that suddenly felt unreal. From her window seat, she watched the last of the baggage being loaded, the yellow-vested workers moving with practiced efficiency. She smiled faintly, thinking of how Marcus had insisted on a window seat because she loved watching the earth shrink below, the rivers and highways turning into ribbons, the clouds opening like vast white kingdoms. It made her feel small. Yes, but in a way that connected her to something infinite. For a moment, everything was perfect. The hum of boarding chatter was distant, almost melodic. She felt wrapped in gratitude and the rare luxury of being cared for so fully. She closed her eyes, let the silence wash over her. Then the disruption arrived. A couple entered the cabin, mid-40s perhaps. The woman's hair was a sharp, angular blonde bob, her wrist adorned with a tennis bracelet that caught the cabin lights. She moved with a certain confidence, the kind that expected deference. The man beside her was softer around the edges, his posture slightly bent, as if he'd spent years apologizing for things he didn't do. They paused in the aisle near Evelyn's seat, their voices hushed, but not hushed enough. Trailing behind them was a flight attendant with a polished smile, her name tag gleaming, Brenda Collins. Brenda's uniform was immaculate, every line crisp, every gesture rehearsed. She approached Evelyn with a warmth that was almost too sweet, like sugar masking something bitter. "Good morning, ma'am," Brenda began, her voice carrying just enough to draw glances from nearby passengers. "I hope you're comfortable. We have Mr. and Mrs. Sterling here. They're celebrating their anniversary and we're hoping to sit together. Right now, they're seated in 2B and 4D. We were wondering if you might be willing to move to 4D so they can sit side by side." Evelyn blinked, polite but puzzled. She looked at the couple. The woman, Bethany Sterling, was already smiling tightly, her fingers linked through her husband's arm. Robert Sterling, his eyes fixed on the floor, avoided Evelyn's gaze. "Oh," Evelyn said kindly, her grandmotherly tone instinctive. "Happy anniversary to you both." She assumed Brenda was making small talk, a passing courtesy. But then she noticed Brenda's smile stiffen, the expectant tilt of Bethany's head, the subtle shift in the air around her. "I'm sorry," Evelyn said gently, still smiling, "but my son bought this seat for me. Specifically, it's quite special. I'd really prefer to stay here, if that's all the same." Bethany let out a loud, impatient sigh, not directed at Evelyn so much as at the cabin itself, as if the entire world conspired to inconvenience her. "It's just a seat," she muttered, her voice dripping with disdain. "Some people are so inflexible." The words stung. Not because of their meaning, Evelyn had faced worse, but because of their casual cruelty. Tossed into the air like scraps. She sat a little straighter, her hands resting on Baldwin's book, her lips pressed into a thin, composed line. Brenda's smile didn't falter, but her eyes sharpened. "Ma'am, it would be a great help to us. At Ascend Airlines, we always do our best to keep couples and families together. Evelyn's pulse quickened. Her smile faded, but her voice remained calm. "But we're not family," she said, meeting Brenda's gaze steadily. "We're strangers. I paid for this seat. Or rather, my son did." The mention of payment seemed to shift the atmosphere, invisible but undeniable. Bethany's eyes swept Evelyn up and down, pausing on her simple dress, her well-worn shoes, her lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. "We'd be happy to buy you a drink voucher," she said, her tone carrying the edge of condescension. "It's just that this section, well, we fly it often. It would be easier for everyone if you just moved." The words were a dagger wrapped in velvet. Evelyn felt the old familiar sting, the reminder that, to some, she didn't belong here. That, no matter the ticket, the age, or the sacrifices that led her here, she would always be seen as out of place. Her grip tightened on the book. She inhaled slowly, steadying herself. Then she turned her gaze to the window, signaling the conversation was over. But it wasn't. Not yet. The storm was only beginning. Brenda Collins did not move away. Her smile was fixed, but her posture changed ever so slightly, shoulders straighter, her clipboard held against her side like a shield. Evelyn Harper could sense the shift. It was the same transformation she had witnessed countless times in classrooms, when a student pretended to be polite while sharpening their words into weapons. "Mrs. Harper," Brenda said, her voice now a fraction firmer. "We do try to keep families and couples together whenever possible. It's part of the service we pride ourselves on." Evelyn looked at her boarding pass again, as if to remind herself that she had not imagined it. 2A. The letters and numbers were printed clearly. Her son's gift to her, written in ink and promise. She held it between her fingers and then met Brenda's eyes. "I understand that," she said softly, her voice calm but steady. "But this is the seat my son purchased for me. It matters to him, and it matters to me. I would prefer to remain where I am." For a moment, Brenda hesitated, as if the words "I prefer" had unsettled her, but then she leaned slightly closer, lowering her voice into something that was meant to sound confidential, but only came across as patronizing. "Ma'am, it would be very helpful if you could cooperate. It will make the flight more pleasant for everyone." The phrase hung in the air like smoke. For everyone. As though Evelyn's quiet refusal was now a disruption, a threat to harmony. She felt her cheeks warm, not from shame, but from the weight of being cast as unreasonable when she had done nothing but claim what was hers. Bethany Sterling shifted impatiently in the aisle. Her blonde bob caught the light like glass, and the bracelet on her wrist sparkled with every movement. She let out an audible breath, the kind of sound people make in grocery store lines when the customer ahead of them pulls out a handful of coupons. "It's just a seat," Bethany said, her tone sharp enough to cut. She wasn't speaking directly to Evelyn. Not exactly. She was speaking to the air, to the rows of first-class passengers who were now watching discreetly from behind raised newspapers and lowered headphones. Some people can be so inflexible. Evelyn turned her head, slowly, and for the first time looked directly at Bethany. Their eyes met. Evelyn's were calm, the color of dark earth, deep with decades of patience and quiet endurance. Bethany's were bright, restless, carrying an edge of triumph as though this were already settled in her favor. "I am not inflexible," Evelyn said quietly. Her voice was not raised, but it carried a clarity that silenced even the rustle of newspapers. I am simply sitting in the seat I purchased. Robert Sterling, standing beside his wife, shifted awkwardly. His hands fidgeted with the handle of his carry-on bag. His gaze never rose from the floor. He looked like a man who had long ago given up winning arguments, who had learned to survive by shrinking himself beside his wife's certainty. Brenda's smile was gone now. In its place was something more rigid, more officious. Mrs. Harper. We do have the right to reseat passengers if it is required for operational needs. The words were rehearsed, part of the airline's training, but the way Brenda spoke them made them sound like a threat. "Is this an operational need?" Evelyn asked, her teacher's instinct surfacing. Her question was simple, direct, and demanded clarity. She had spent her life teaching young people the difference between rules and excuses, and she wasn't about to abandon that discipline now. Or is this a preferential request from another passenger? The air seemed to tighten. A few heads turned. Even Robert Sterling glanced up for the first time, his mouth opening slightly before he closed it again. Bethany bristled, stepping forward with her chin raised. "Look," she said, her tone dripping with condescension. She gave Evelyn a slow once-over, her eyes flicking across the older woman's plain dress, her modest shoes, her weathered handbag. "We'll be happy to buy you a drink voucher. It's just that, well, we fly this route all the time. This section, it's familiar to us. It would be easier for everyone if you just moved." There it was. The unspoken made almost spoken. "This section isn't for you." Evelyn felt a sharp, fleeting anger rise within her, hot and bright, but just as quickly. She pressed it down, smoothed it with a lifetime of practice. Anger was not new to her. She had tasted it often in classrooms when administrators dismissed her, in grocery stores when cashiers ignored her, in sidewalks when strangers refused to meet her gaze. But she had learned that her dignity was not theirs to grant or withhold. Her voice, when she spoke, was quiet but unyielding. "A drink voucher will not be necessary, and I will not be moving." She turned slightly toward the window, signaling her decision was final. She thought that would end it. She thought surely now they would respect her answer. But Brenda did not leave. Instead, the flight attendant leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow felt harsher than anything she had said before. "Ma'am, please don't make this difficult. I don't want to have to involve the purser." The purser. The word was a warning. Evelyn closed her book gently, her thumb still marking the page. She turned back to Brenda, her eyes steady, her tone dangerously quiet. "Perhaps you should." It was a challenge, soft but unmistakable. Brenda's face flushed. She straightened quickly and strode toward the front of the cabin. Bethany Sterling's lips curved into a smirk. Robert looked at the floor again, as though he could sink into it. Evelyn sat perfectly still, her book resting in her lap. She felt her pulse beating hard against her ribs, but her face betrayed nothing. The purser arrived within minutes. Gary Mitchell was a tall man with broad shoulders that strained against the seams of his Navy uniform. His hair was clipped close, his jaw set in a line that suggested he enjoyed being obeyed. When he spoke, his tone was final, as though the matter had already been decided. "Ma'am," he began, not looking at her but at the boarding pass in Brenda's hand. "We are in the final stages of boarding and need to resolve this quickly. We have a couple who need to sit together. You are in a window seat. They are assigned an aisle and middle further back. The simplest solution is for you to move to 4D. His words were brisk, efficient, stripped of empathy. He didn't ask for her side of the story. He didn't even make eye contact until the very end, and even then, it was fleeting. "Now," he said, his tone tightening, "are you going to move, or will I have to call the captain and have you removed from the flight for non-compliance?" The words hit like a slap. Removed. From the flight. Evelyn felt her throat constrict. She imagined her son waiting in Washington. The pride in his voice when he told her she'd be flying in comfort. The way he insisted that she be treated like a queen. And now, here she was, threatened with removal, her dignity bartered away for someone else's convenience. The cabin was no longer hushed. Passengers were openly staring now, some with sympathy, others with irritation, all waiting to see what she would do. Bethany Sterling looked triumphant. Robert Sterling looked like he wanted to disappear. Evelyn's eyes prickled with tears, but she refused to let them fall. Not here. Not in front of them. She would not give them that satisfaction. With movements slow and deliberate, she gathered her book, her handbag, her boarding pass. Her voice trembled only slightly as she said, "There's no need for threats. If this is how Ascend Airlines treats its first-class passengers, then I was mistaken about its reputation." She stood, her back straight, her chin lifted, and stepped into the aisle. The shameful walk from 2A to 4D felt longer than it was. The plush leather she left behind seemed to mock her as she moved toward the cramped middle seat near the galley. She slid into the narrow space, tucked her belongings under the seat, and clasped her hands together to stop them from shaking. Around her, passengers shifted uncomfortably. A few avoided her gaze. One young man in 4C glanced at her briefly, then quickly back to his laptop, as though he hadn't seen a thing. Evelyn leaned back against the seat, closing her eyes for a moment. It wasn't about the seat anymore. It was about respect. It was about the gift her son had given her being stripped away. It was about being made to feel small when all she had done was claim her place. The intercom chimed. The boarding doors closed. The plane was preparing to taxi. Evelyn opened her eyes, reached for her phone, and typed a message with fingers that shook despite her resolve. She didn't write a long explanation. She didn't spill her emotions onto the screen. She knew her son. She knew what mattered. "Marcus, they made me move from 2A to 4D for another couple. Flight attendant Brenda Collins and purser Gary Mitchell were very rude. Don't worry, I'm fine. Love you." She pressed send, and somewhere 3,000 miles away, in a high-rise office overlooking Washington, D.C., her son's phone buzzed with a vibration he had programmed for only one person in the world. The story was about to change. The hum of the engines grew louder as the plane began to taxi away from the gate. Evelyn Harper sat stiffly in seat 4D, the middle space pressed between a young man tapping furiously on his laptop and a heavy-set traveler already asleep against the aisle. Her shoulders felt pinned, her knees cramped. She held her book in her lap but couldn't bring herself to open it. The leather of seat 2A seemed to cling to her memory like a ghost. She drew in a slow breath and closed her eyes. She had learned long ago that sometimes the only way to survive humiliation was to breathe through it, to let the air carry the sting away. As a schoolteacher, she'd been called names by students, dismissed by administrators, ignored in meetings. She'd been told she was too strict, too lenient, too black, too female. But she had endured it all with quiet dignity, because she knew who she was, because she knew the power of silence, but silence now was harder than ever. She thought of Marcus. She thought of how his face would fall if he knew the truth that the seat he had bought as a symbol of love had been stripped from her, that his mother was made to feel small in front of strangers. She had not told him in her message how much it hurt. She'd written only the facts, because she wanted to protect him from the raw wound of it. Yet, even as the plane rolled forward, her chest ached with the weight of what had been stolen. She glanced sideways at the young man beside her, the one in 4C. He was maybe in his early 20s, dark hair, glasses perched on the edge of his nose. He typed furiously on his laptop, earbuds in, seemingly lost in another world. But Evelyn noticed, just for a second, that his eyes flickered toward her reflection in the glossy cabin wall. He had seen. He knew. He returned to his screen quickly, but his fingers hesitated, as though they carried a heavier burden than the words he was typing. Evelyn said nothing. Sometimes the witnesses of injustice stayed silent, not because they didn't care, but because they were afraid. She couldn't fault him for that. She knew fear well. Her mind drifted, unbidden, back to the years when Marcus was a boy. Their apartment in Oakland had been small, just 2 bedrooms, the walls thin enough that she could hear him whisper equations to himself at night. She remembered the times she had worked double shifts, tutoring after school, shelving books at the library until her back ached, all so she could keep him fed, clothed, and safe. She had sacrificed not because she wanted thanks, but because that was what love demanded. To see him now, a man commanding respect in boardrooms, a man whose name was spoken with admiration in circles she had never imagined was her greatest reward. And yet here she was, reduced again to invisibility, forced into a seat that told her she didn't belong. The irony cut deep. Her son had conquered worlds, and still she could not sit in peace on a plane. She clasped her hands together tightly, pressing Baldwin's book between her palms. Inside, anger burned, but it was not the loud, explosive kind. It was the quiet fire, the kind that lived deep in the bones, the kind that taught patience because patience was the only way to survive. She would not give them the spectacle of her fury. She would not give Bethany Sterling the satisfaction of seeing her unravel. Strength, she reminded herself, was often silent. But silence didn't stop the whispers. From a row ahead, Evelyn caught Bethany's voice, light and casual, as though discussing the weather. Honestly, I don't see why she made such a fuss. It's just a seat. Some people don't understand how these things work. First class isn't for everyone. Evelyn's jaw tightened. She stared at the fabric of the seat in front of her, willing herself not to react. Robert Sterling murmured something too soft to hear, and Bethany answered with a dismissive laugh. Evelyn wondered, not for the first time, how a man could live so long in the shadow of a woman who thrived on belittling others. But she let the thought pass. Their marriage was not her concern. Her concern was Marcus. Always Marcus. She thought of the message she had sent. The words had been brief, almost clinical. They made me move from 2A to 4D. Flight attendant Brenda Collins and purser Gary Mitchell were very rude. Don't worry, I'm fine. Love you. She wondered how Marcus would read them. Would he hear the tremor in her silence? Would he know that she had chosen her words not to burden him but to shield him? Or would he take them at face value and simply worry? Her stomach tightened. Perhaps she should have been more honest. Perhaps she should have told him how it felt to be stared at like a trespasser in a place she had every right to occupy. Perhaps she should have admitted that. At 71, she was tired of having to prove herself worthy of basic respect. But no, she couldn't do that to him. He was carrying so much already. She would not add her pain to his. The intercom chimed again. The captain's voice, calm but brisk, filled the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Foster. We are number 3 in line for takeoff. Please ensure your devices are switched to airplane mode. Cabin crew, prepare for departure. Around her, seatbelts clicked, tray tables locked." The man in 4C sighed, closed his laptop, and finally removed his earbuds. For a brief moment, his eyes met Evelyn's. There was something there, hesitation, guilt, recognition. He opened his mouth as if to say something, then thought better of it. Evelyn offered him a faint smile, one that told him she understood his silence. He returned a nod, then looked away. The plane lurched forward, engines roaring as it moved closer to the runway. Evelyn braced herself, fingers gripping the edges of her book. She tried to steady her breathing, tried to imagine the view she would soon have from the sky, the rivers and highways like silver threads, the clouds like floating kingdoms. She tried to hold on to the gift her son had given her, even if she had been denied its full promise. But beneath her composure, her heart whispered doubts. Had she been wrong to resist? Should she have simply stood up the first time and moved quietly, without fuss, without confrontation? Was her dignity worth the discomfort that followed, or had she done the right thing by refusing, by insisting that her seat was hers? The questions tangled inside her like roots, and yet, in the deepest part of her, she knew the truth. It had never been about the seat. It had always been about being seen. The engines surged louder. The plane rattled slightly as it prepared for takeoff. Evelyn pressed her head back against the seat, her eyes closed, her body heavy with weariness. Somewhere across the country, her son's phone buzzed with the message she had sent. Somewhere, a choice was being made that would change not just her flight, but the course of many lives. She did not know it yet. She could not have guessed. All she could do was sit in silence, strong and unyielding as the world began to shift around her. The cabin lights dimmed slightly as the aircraft prepared for takeoff. A hush settled across the rows, broken only by the muffled coughs of passengers and the faint squeak of overhead bins closing. Evelyn Harper sat motionless in seat 4D, her hands folded neatly over James Baldwin's novel. Her fingers ached from gripping it so tightly, but she didn't loosen them. The book was the only anchor she had left. Her phone was now tucked away in her bag, its screen dark. She had pressed send. The message had flown out into the invisible sky, crossing miles and towers until it reached the one person she trusted more than anyone else. She had no idea how he would react. She had kept her words factual, stripped of her emotion. But Marcus knew her too well. He would hear the things she had not written. He always did. A part of her regretted sending it. She didn't want him to be upset. This was supposed to be a trip of joy. She wanted to arrive in Washington with stories of comfort, not stories of shame. She wanted to sit in the audience as her son received his award, her heart swelling with pride, not carrying the residue of this humiliation. But another part of her knew she had no choice. Silence would have been a betrayal of herself, and Marcus had taught her that truth, even painful truth, was worth speaking. The plane rumbled as it turned toward the runway. Evelyn stared at the small monitor in front of her, its safety video playing cheerfully, a cruel contrast to the heaviness in her chest. She tried to focus on the cartoon seatbelt figures, but her mind kept replaying the moment she had been told to move. The condescension in Bethany Sterling's voice, the coldness in Brenda Collins' smile, the finality in Gary Mitchell's threat. It wasn't the first time she'd been told she didn't belong, but somehow, sitting in the seat her son had given her, the seat that symbolized his gratitude for everything she had done, it cut deeper. This wasn't just another slot. This was a theft of something precious, a memory stolen before it could even be made. She closed her eyes. She whispered to herself the words she often told her students years ago when they faced unfairness. You are not what they say you are. You are who you know yourself to be. Miles away, on the top floor of a glass tower in Washington, D.C., Marcus Harper's phone buzzed gently on the polished surface of a mahogany conference table. He was in the middle of a high-stakes negotiation with executives from a Japanese technology firm. The room was tense, the air thick with numbers, projections, and clauses. But when that vibration hummed against the wood, Marcus froze. He had set that pattern himself. 3 soft pulses, a pause, 3 again. No one else in the world used it. It belonged only to his mother. He glanced down. His jaw tightened as his eyes scanned the words. They made me move from 2A to 4D for another couple. Flight attendant Brenda Collins and purser Gary Mitchell were very rude. Don't worry, I'm fine. Love you? Don't worry. Those 2 words hollowed him out. He knew her well enough to understand what they meant. She was shielding him. She always had. From scraped knees to broken hearts to the sting of prejudice. She had carried herself with strength so that he could carry himself with hope, and now she was trying to carry this too. But she didn't need to anymore. Marcus sat back slowly in his chair. The Japanese executives watched him curiously, their voices faltering as they realized he was no longer listening. His CFO, a sharp-eyed man named David Chen, frowned across the table. "Excuse me," Marcus said quietly, his tone cutting through the room like tempered steel. "I need a moment." He stood, phone in hand, and walked toward the tall windows. The city sprawled beneath him, a lattice of glass and steel shimmering in the afternoon sun. It was the world he had fought his way into, a world that had not been designed for men like him. Every deal, every contract, every victory had been earned with double the effort and half the recognition. But he had prevailed. He had built Nexus Innovations into the nervous system of modern commerce. Airlines, hospitals, shipping giants, they all ran on his code, including Ascend Airlines. He stared at the message again. He could see it play out in his mind as if he had been there. His mother, seated quietly with her book, the couple, entitled and impatient, the attendant, polished and insincere, the purser, blunt and threatening. He could picture her being forced to stand, her walk down the aisle heavy with humiliation. His mother, the woman who had given him everything, reduced to tears she would never show. The anger that rose in him was not loud. It was not a storm. It was ice, sharp and silent, coursing through him with precision. He didn't yell. He didn't curse. He didn't even sigh. He simply opened his messages, scrolled to a name he knew well, and began to type. Thomas Grant, CEO of Ascend Airlines. Tom, my mother, Evelyn Harper, is on Flight 451 from San Francisco to D.C. She was just forced out of her paid first-class seat 2A by your crew specifically. Brenda Collins and Gary Mitchell. The plane is currently taxiing. I expect an immediate stop, a personal apology from the captain, and the removal of the offending crew from the flight. If this plane leaves the ground with them on board, consider our contract terminated. You have 2 minutes. He hit send. He did not add threats. He did not need to. Nexus Innovations was in the middle of rolling out its most advanced logistics system across Ascend Airlines' fleet. The deal was worth 9 figures. Without Nexus, Ascend would be thrown into chaos. Thomas Grant knew this. He knew exactly what Marcus Harper's silence could cost him. Back on the tarmac in San Francisco, Captain David Foster was running through final checks when his headset crackled. "Ascend 451 hold position," came the tower's voice. Foster frowned. "Tower, confirm reason for hold, stand by, 451. Await further instructions." The captain's brow furrowed. A hold at this stage was unusual. Weather was clear, traffic minimal. Something was wrong. He glanced toward the cabin door just as the intercom light blinked. Corporate operations was calling. In the cabin, passengers began to murmur. Evelyn felt the shift immediately. The plane slowed, then turned slightly, its engines idling. A voice announced overhead, "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain. We've been instructed to return to the gate. We don't have details yet, but we'll update you shortly." Groans filled the cabin. Delays were nothing new, but the abruptness of this one sparked unease. Bethany Sterling leaned toward her husband, rolling her eyes. "Unbelievable. This airline is always a mess." Robert Sterling muttered something vague, staring at his shoes. Evelyn sat very still, her pulse quickening. She didn't know what was happening, but in her heart, she felt the faintest flicker of possibility. She had sent her message into the void. Maybe, just maybe, someone had heard it. The plane rolled slowly back toward the gate, its wheels groaning against the asphalt. Passengers shifted restlessly. Brenda Collins whispered something to Gary Mitchell, her posture taut with confusion. The jet bridge extended, locking onto the cabin door with a heavy clank. The hiss of pressurized air filled the silence. Then the door swung open. It wasn't TSA. It wasn't security. 3 figures in tailored suits stepped aboard, and everything in the cabin changed. The cabin fell into a silence that was almost physical as the 3 executives stepped aboard. Their shoes struck the carpet with measured weight, the kind of stride that made clear they hadn't come to travel. They had come to act. Passengers leaned sideways in their seats, whispering. Phones half raised, though unsure if they should record. Flight attendants exchanged quick glances, their smiles faltering. Evelyn Harper sat frozen in 4D, unsure whether to feel relief or dread. She had never seen anything like this. At the head of the group was Jonathan Pierce, the airline's vice president of operations for the West Coast. He was tall, his salt and pepper hair neatly combed, his face grim. Behind him walked a woman with sharp eyes and a leather folder clutched in her hand. And, trailing them, a younger man in a navy suit, his expression tense but unreadable. Jonathan's gaze swept the first-class cabin like a blade. He didn't pause for pleasantries, didn't greet the captain, who had stepped into the aisle demanding an explanation. He ignored him entirely and focused on 2 people. Brenda Collins, Gary Mitchell. His voice was low, steady, but every syllable carried authority. Brenda blinked, her lips parting. "Yes, sir." "What is this about?" "You are to gather your belongings and exit the aircraft immediately," Jonathan said. Gary frowned, his voice rising defensively. "Excuse me. We have a cabin full of passengers to now." Jonathan cut in, his tone slicing through the air. "Both of you, with me." A ripple of shock passed through the cabin. Brenda's face drained of color. She looked around for support for the captain, for the other attendants, for anyone but found none. Gary's jaw tightened, but his hands twitched nervously at his sides. Bethany Sterling leaned back in her seat, her eyes wide, then flicked toward Evelyn as though suddenly realizing that the quiet woman in the plain dress might not have been as powerless as she had assumed. "What's the meaning of this?" Gary demanded, his voice louder now, laced with desperation. "We've done nothing wrong. This is completely inappropriate." Jonathan's gaze didn't waver. "The meaning, Mr. Mitchell, is that your employment with Ascend Airlines has been terminated, effective immediately. You are being escorted off this aircraft and off airport property. Your final compensation will be processed through HR. Now move." The silence that followed was so sharp it could have been cut with a knife. Passengers gaped openly, their disbelief painted across their faces. Brenda's mouth opened and closed like she couldn't quite form words. Terminated for what? A seating arrangement. Jonathan's eyes were like steel. For gross misconduct, for failure of service, and for jeopardizing a 9-figure contract vital to the future of this airline. The words landed with the weight of revelation. Even those passengers who had no idea what had transpired moments earlier understood instantly this wasn't just about a seat. Gary's shoulders sagged. He looked as if the fight had drained out of him all at once. Brenda, trembling, bent down to grab her bag. Her hand shook so badly that she dropped it twice before finally clutching it to her chest. With faces pale and eyes downcast, the 2 crew members walked past the staring passengers, their footsteps echoing like a funeral procession. Captain David Foster stepped forward, his own confusion written across his face. "Mr. Pierce, with respect, this is highly irregular. I am the captain of this aircraft, and I should be the one handling any crew matters." Jonathan turned to him. His expression softened only slightly, but his words remained resolute. "Captain, you are temporarily relieved of command pending a full investigation. Your first officer will take the flight from here. Please collect your things." The color drained from the captain's face. For a moment, he looked as though he might protest further. But then he caught sight of the woman with the leather folder. She gave the faintest shake of her head, and something in his resolve cracked. He swallowed hard, nodded stiffly, and disappeared toward the cockpit. The passengers were stunned. Whispers filled the cabin now, urgent and electric. A man in row 3 pulled out his phone to send a flurry of texts. A woman in row 6 pressed her hand to her mouth, wide-eyed. And then Jonathan's attention shifted. He stepped past the emptying crew seats, down the aisle toward 4D. His expression changed, the sharp lines of authority softening into something like respect. He stopped just beside Evelyn Harper, Mrs. Harper. His voice was gentler now. Evelyn blinked, unsure whether she should answer. "Yes." Jonathan's eyes met hers, and he crouched slightly so he could speak to her at eye level. "My name is Jonathan Pierce. I'm deeply sorry for the way you've been treated today. On behalf of Ascend Airlines, I apologize without reservation. It was unacceptable. We failed you." Evelyn's throat tightened. For a moment, she couldn't find words. She had not expected this an executive kneeling beside her. His voice low and contrite. We have your original seat waiting for you," Jonathan continued. "If you prefer, we can also arrange alternative accommodations, including a private charter. Whatever you need, it is yours." Gasps traveled through the nearby rows. Bethany Sterling stiffened, her face paling. Robert stared straight ahead, his hands clenched on his knees. Evelyn looked at Jonathan, then down at her book, then back again. Her voice, when it came, was steady. "I don't need a private jet. I just want the seat my son bought for me." Jonathan nodded. "Of course." The aisle parted like a tide as passengers shifted, making space for Evelyn to rise. Slowly, with quiet dignity, she stood and walked back toward seat 2A. Bethany and Robert Sterling shrank away from her as though they had seen a ghost. Bethany's mouth opened, but no words came. Evelyn didn't even glance at them. She moved past, her back straight, her steps unhurried. When she sank into 2A again, the leather welcomed her like an old friend. She closed her eyes briefly, letting the moment settle. Her dignity, stolen minutes before, had been restored, but not by accident, not by luck, by her son, by Marcus, at that exact moment in his D.C. office. Marcus sat in silence, phone still in his hand. His CFO, David Chen, hovered near the conference table. "Marcus," David said cautiously, "do you want me to continue negotiations with the Japanese team?" Marcus's eyes stayed fixed on the city skyline. "Yes, tell them the standard terms, no concessions, then end the meeting." David hesitated. "And what about your mother?" Marcus finally turned, his expression carved from stone. "She is being taken care of." The quiet fury in his voice was more chilling than any shout could have been. He didn't slam the phone down. He didn't raise his voice. He simply exuded a calm, coiled power that made even his closest advisors wary. He had moved an entire airline with a single message, and he wasn't finished yet. Evelyn Harper sank into seat 2A once more, her back easing against the wide leather, though her body still carried the stiffness of humiliation. She let her hands rest gently on the armrests, her book unopened, her eyes fixed on the oval window. From here she could see the gray stretch of tarmac, the blinking lights of other aircraft waiting to depart. For the first time since boarding, she exhaled a breath that was more than just survival. The atmosphere in the first-class cabin had shifted. It was no longer a sanctuary of hushed privilege. It was electric, buzzing with whispers, with darting glances and phones held just low enough not to be obvious. Passengers weren't just curious anymore, they were unsettled. They had seen something unusual, something raw. 2 crew members marched off, a captain relieved of duty, and a powerful executive kneeling in apology to an elderly woman. That wasn't part of the script of air travel. Bethany Sterling sat rigid in seat 2B, directly beside Evelyn, her body angled sharply away as though proximity alone might burn her. Her husband, Robert, sat beside her, stiff, his hands pressed flat against his knees. Neither of them spoke. Bethany's bracelet glittered under the cabin lights, but her face had lost its shine. She kept her gaze fixed straight ahead, her lips pressed into a tight, pale line. She had wanted Evelyn gone out of sight, out of mind. Now, Evelyn was beside her again, restored, and Bethany found herself the one who was diminished. Evelyn did not look at her. She didn't need to. She understood the power of silence better than most. She had spent a lifetime teaching young people that sometimes restraint carried more weight than words. The murmurs swirled. "Did you see they fired them right here? What's going on? Must have been serious. One passenger, a man in a crisp suit, leaned toward his companion. I guarantee you this has to do with money. Nobody pulls crew like that unless there's a big deal on the line. Another, a woman with bright red nails, whispered, I heard her son is some tech billionaire. That's why they came. Evelyn's lips curved into the faintest smile. It wasn't pride exactly. It was more complex than that. She hadn't wanted spectacle. She hadn't wanted to be the center of a scene, but hearing Marcus's name in the hushed tones gave her a quiet reassurance. She wasn't alone in this. The replacement crew boarded swiftly, moving down the aisle with professional smiles that trembled just slightly at the edges. They greeted passengers, checked seat belts, and handed out fresh glasses of water. No one spoke of what had just happened, but it lingered like smoke after a fire. The intercom crackled again, the new captain's voice calm. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Riley. Apologies for the delay. We had an unexpected change of crew, but we're cleared for departure now. We'll be in the air shortly. The plane pushed back once more, the engines rising in pitch beside her. Bethany shifted uncomfortably, her body language betraying her unease. Finally, unable to bear the silence, she spoke, her voice low and brittle. I hope you're satisfied. Evelyn turned her head slowly, meeting Bethany's eyes with a calm that was sharper than anger. Satisfied, Bethany's jaw tightened. You caused all of this. People lost their jobs. The flight is delayed. Do you think this makes you some kind of hero? Robert inhaled sharply, his hand twitching as if to touch his wife's arm, but he stopped himself. Evelyn's voice was soft, but it carried. I didn't cause this. They did. All I did was sit in the seat my son gave me. That is not a crime. Bethany's cheeks flushed pink. She opened her mouth again, but Evelyn lifted her hand slightly, a gesture not of dismissal but of finality. Sometimes, Mrs. Sterling, when people create their own storm, they shouldn't be surprised when it rains. The words landed like stones in water, sending ripples through the silence. Passengers nearby heard them. Some looked down quickly, hiding small smiles. Others simply nodded faintly, as though confirming what they already believed. Bethany said nothing more. She turned away, her body taut with fury, but her silence betrayed her defeat. The engines roared. The plane surged down the runway, and with a great shudder, it lifted into the sky. Evelyn pressed her head against the seat, the vibration steadying her heartbeat. Through the small oval window, the ground fell away, the city shrinking into grids of light and shadow. For the first time that day, she allowed herself a sliver of peace. But across the country, the story was already beginning to spread. At Washington, D.C., as Union Square Hotel, a journalist for a popular online news site received a message from a source within Ascend Airlines operations team. The subject line read, Emergency Ground Stop, Flight 451. Attached was a screenshot of a corporate alert immediate removal of crew members Collins and Mitchell. Reason executive order, contract jeopardy. By the time Evelyn's plane reached cruising altitude, that journalist had drafted 3 paragraphs with a headline sharp enough to cut through the noise of the internet billionaire CEO's Mother Force's flight crew's removal. In the Nexus Innovations boardroom, Marcus Harper sat alone now, the Japanese delegation gone, the contract finalized under his CFO's careful hand. His phone buzzed again, this time with alerts, notifications, whispers from the digital world. He read the first headline and let out a slow breath. He had expected this. The narrative would twist. It always did. To the public, nuance was a casualty of speed. They wouldn't see Evelyn's quiet dignity. They wouldn't hear the condescension of Bethany Sterling, the cruelty of Brenda Collins, the threat of Gary Mitchell. They would see only power, a billionaire's hand moving pieces on a board, crushing smaller figures under its weight. Marcus leaned back in his chair, staring at the city skyline. His reflection in the glass was sharp, unreadable. He could almost hear his mother's voice in his head, telling him not to fight fire with fire, telling him to let truth do its work. Still, a storm was coming, and storms demanded preparation. Back on the plane, Evelyn reached for the small screen in front of her. She selected the map view, watching the tiny aircraft icon crawl across the country. Somewhere ahead, Marcus was waiting. She imagined his arms around her, his deep voice reassuring her as he always did. Her heart ached with pride, with love, with a shadow of guilt. She had wanted this trip to be simple joy, but now she knew it was more than that. It was a reckoning. She folded her hands in her lap and closed her eyes. The hum of the engines filled her ears, steady and constant. The sky stretched out ahead, wide and endless. She didn't know that while she sat in silence, millions of eyes would soon turn toward her story, and not all of them would be kind. By the time Flight 451 leveled out at 35,000 feet, Evelyn Harper had finally managed to open her book again. The words blurred on the page, but she forced herself to read, if only to anchor her mind to something steady. She did not know what was unfolding thousands of miles below, in the world of headlines, hashtags, and viral outrage. The first reports trickled out within the hour. A gossip blog known for sensationalism broke the story with a headline designed to ignite fury. Billionaire CEO's mother gets flight crew fired over seat swap. The article offered no nuance, no context, just a narrative dripping with insinuation. The crew had been removed mid-boarding. A powerful executive's mother was involved. A tech giant's shadow hung over the incident. That was all the blog needed to craft its picture wealth crushing the working class. By the time Evelyn closed her book and set it gently on her lap, the story had already spread like fire. Major outlets picked it up, each with their own spin. Some framed it as corporate overreach, others as proof of inequality in the skies. The details were sparse, but the outrage was plentiful. Brenda Collins was the first to act. By nightfall, she was seated on the plush sofa of a national morning show, a box of tissues in her hand, her eyes red as cameras zoomed in close. It was just a misunderstanding, she said, her voice trembling, carefully rehearsed. We were trying to help a couple celebrate their anniversary. We wanted to keep them together. Mrs. Harper seemed confused. We were gentle with her. We explained everything. But she became upset. Next thing we know, we're escorted off like criminals. The host leaned forward, sympathetic. So you were blindsided. Brenda dabbed her eyes delicately, completely. 20 years I've given to this job. To be humiliated in front of passengers, it was the worst moment of my career. Gary Mitchell sat beside her, wearing a crisp suit that strained against his broad shoulders. His face was carved into solemnity. I've dedicated my life to passenger safety. That's always been my mission. That day was no different. We were calm, professional, doing our jobs. Suddenly, we were treated like garbage bags to be thrown away. The host's eyes widened. "And you had no warning, none," Gary said firmly. One moment we were preparing for takeoff. The next we were marched off without explanation. Over a text. A single text from someone who wasn't even on the plane. The interview ended with Brenda pressing a tissue to her lips, her voice breaking. "I just don't understand how one person can have so much power. We're people. We have families. And we were destroyed over a seat." Clips of the interview ricocheted across social media within minutes. Hashtags trended. "Stand with Brenda," "Justice for Gary." The narrative hardened. They were the little people, crushed by the arrogance of the elite. And then came the Sterlings. Bethany and Robert appeared in their tastefully decorated suburban living room, seated on matching armchairs. Bethany's blonde bob gleamed under studio lights. She clasped her husband's hand dramatically. "We feel terrible about how this has all blown up," she said, her voice smooth with practiced sorrow. "We never wanted anyone to lose their jobs. We simply asked if it was possible to switch seats for our anniversary. The crew handled everything with professionalism. We never saw them raise their voices. It was just a misunderstanding. To see them treated like this, it's heartbreaking." Robert nodded, his face pale, his words careful. "They were kind to us, respectful. We didn't expect this nightmare. We just wanted to sit together. Their performance was impeccable contrition without consequence. Innocence wrapped in wealth. They had turned themselves into sympathetic bystanders, caught in the orbit of Marcus Harper's supposed tantrum. By midnight, the backlash was in full swing. Comment sections overflowed with venom. Another billionaire thinks rules don't apply. Firing working people over mommy's seat. Pathetic. Power tripping. He hides behind his wealth and his mother in Washington. Marcus Harper sat in his office well past dark, his phone buzzing with each fresh headline. He read them silently, one after another. He didn't slam the screen down. He didn't curse. He simply sat in his leather chair, elbows resting on the armrests, his hands steepled before his face. His head of communications, Isabella Rossi, paced the room, her heels striking the polished floor in sharp beats. "Marcus, this is spiraling. They're controlling the narrative. If we don't act now, it'll cement. You need to release a statement. Explain what really happened. Show that your mother was humiliated. That this wasn't about power. It was about dignity." Marcus said nothing. "Marcus," Isabella pressed, her voice rising. "We can fight this. We can release details of our contract with Ascend, prove the leverage existed before the incident. We can paint Brenda and Gary as incompetent. But we have to move now. Every minute we wait, public opinion hardens." Still, Marcus remained silent, his eyes fixed on the dark window where the city lights blurred like stars. Finally, he spoke, his voice quiet, deliberate. "No." Isabella froze mid-stride. "No." Marcus lowered his hands, turning his gaze on her. His eyes were steady, cold fire smoldering beneath. "If we respond now, we enter their game. It becomes billionaire versus flight attendants, and the public will always root for the underdog. Always." Isabella frowned. "So, we just let them drag your name through the mud. Let them call your mother a liar. Let them paint you as a tyrant." Marcus leaned back in his chair, folding his hands calmly across his chest. "We let them talk. We let them build their story. We let them get comfortable in their lies." He paused, his expression unreadable. "Because when the truth arrives, it won't whisper, it will thunder, and it will crush everything they've built." Isabella studied him, torn between admiration and frustration. Marcus wasn't reckless, he wasn't arrogant, he was patient. Too patient, perhaps, but in that patience lay a kind of power she had never fully understood. Do nothing publicly, Marcus said again, his tone final. Prepare everything privately. I want our legal team ready. Discovery will be brutal. Let them sue, let them scream. In the end, all they will have are their lies, and lies collapse under their own weight. He turned back to the window, his reflection gazing back at him. He saw not the CEO, not the strategist, but the boy who had watched his mother endure slight after slight with quiet strength. He saw her seated on that plane, her dignity tested yet again. He thought of her message, "Don't worry, I'm fine," and he felt the quiet rage tighten in his chest. No, she wasn't fine, and he would not rest until the world knew it. On Flight 451, Evelyn sat in her reclined seat, the soft hum of engines in her ears. She had no idea what storms were brewing below. She had no knowledge of hashtags, interviews, or television appearances. She only knew that she had faced cruelty and had survived it. Her son would carry the rest. Morning sunlight spilled across Washington, D.C., casting long shadows over the city's marble facades. The world outside moved with its usual rhythm sirens in the distance. Footsteps on pavement, office towers fill in with weary workers. But in one quiet apartment near Georgetown University, Leo Martinez sat frozen in front of his laptop. His thumb hovered over the spacebar, the screen reflecting back his weary eyes. The file was there, tucked in a folder he had named Evidence, almost like a dare to himself. A shaky, discreet recording captured through his laptop's webcam during Flight 451. It showed Evelyn Harper, calm and composed, insisting on the seat her son had purchased for her. It captured Bethany Sterling's condescension, Brenda Collins's saccharine smile hardening into threats, and Gary Mitchell's ultimatum move or be removed from the flight. The audio was crystal clear. There were no raised voices from Evelyn, no profanity, no aggression, just her dignity, her refusal to be bullied, and the heavy silence as she was forced into a worse seat. It was undeniable truth, and Leo couldn't bring himself to release it. The news cycle had already reached fever pitch. On television, Brenda Collins sat beneath studio lights, tears glittering under mascara as she spoke about being unfairly targeted. She was hostile. Brenda sniffled. She threw her boarding pass at me. She used foul language. I was shaken. I feared for my safety. Gary Mitchell sat beside her, his deep voice somber. 25 years of service, gone in a flash, over a misunderstanding. I wasn't even harsh. I was calm, measured. But suddenly, we're treated like criminals. How do you explain that to your family? How do you tell your kids you've been destroyed because a billionaire flexed his muscles? The host nodded sympathetically. And now you're filing a lawsuit. Their attorney, Richard Harmon, leaned in. His gray hair was slicked back, his tie bold red. He spoke with practiced outrage. That's right. We're filing a $50 million lawsuit against Marcus Harper personally, and against Ascend Airlines for wrongful termination, defamation, and emotional distress. This was a gross abuse of power. My clients were railroaded, humiliated, and discarded all because a powerful man wanted to make an example. We won't stand for it. The audience clapped. Cameras zoomed in on Brenda dabbing her eyes, Gary clasping his hands together, Harmon shaking his head in mock disbelief. Watching it from his apartment, Leo felt bile rise in his throat. He clenched his fists. They were lying boldly, shamelessly lying, and people were believing them. Hashtags trended, donations poured into a GoFundMe for the wronged crew. Comment sections overflowed with anger directed at Marcus Harper, calling him everything from a tyrant to a bully who hid behind his mother. Leo closed his eyes and pressed his palms against them. He thought of his own grandmother, who had raised him after his parents divorced. He thought of the quiet dignity in her face whenever she endured casual slights at the grocery store, or at church, or even from neighbors. She never lashed out, never lost her composure. She had carried herself with grace, just as Evelyn Harper had done on that plane. And now Evelyn was being called hostile, aggressive, dangerous. Leo's stomach twisted. He wanted to release the video. He wanted to burn the lies to the ground, but fear shackled him. What would it do to his future? He was in his second year at Georgetown Law. He had scraped his way here on scholarships and late nights, carrying mountains of debt, betting everything on a chance to land a position at a top firm. If he stepped into this storm, he would become a target. Brenda and Gary had a ruthless attorney. Marcus Harper was a titan. Both sides could chew him up. He pictured his internship interviews, a partner asking, "So you're the kid who leaked the video?" The troublemaker, he pictured doors closing before he ever had a chance to knock. And yet, silence was its own betrayal. His grandfather's words rang in his memory, sharp and unyielding. Silence in the face of a lie makes you a partner to it. He stared at the file again. His cursor hovered over it. His hands trembled. Across the city, in a gleaming office tower, Marcus Harper's legal team gathered around a mahogany table. Richard Harmon's lawsuit had arrived that morning, thick with accusations and venom. Benjamin Carter, a legendary litigator, adjusted his glasses as he flipped through the pages. His voice was calm but laced with disdain. "They're painting you as a spoiled child who used corporate leverage to punish working-class crew. It's a narrative built for headlines. They'll milk public sympathy for all it's worth." Marcus sat at the head of the table, silent, his eyes scanning the document. His expression betrayed nothing. Isabella Rossi, his communications chief, slammed the table with her palm. "We can't just sit here. They're assassinating your character. Marcus, they're dragging your mother's name through the mud. We have to fight back." Marcus finally looked up. His gaze was steady, his voice low. "We will fight, but not in the press. In the courtroom." Benjamin Carter nodded. "He's right. Public battles are noisy. Legal battles are decisive. Let them tell their story. It will collapse under scrutiny." "But what if there is no scrutiny?" Isabella snapped. "They're controlling the airwaves. People believe them." Marcus turned his eyes back to the window. The Potomac shimmered in the distance, calm, steady. The truth doesn't need to shout. It just needs the right moment to be heard. Benjamin Carter's phone buzzed on the table. He glanced at it, then frowned. An email. Subject line: evidence regarding Flight 451 incident. He opened it. His eyebrows rose. He read aloud, "My name is Leo Martinez. I was a passenger on Flight 451 Seat 4C. I witnessed the entire incident. Mrs. Evelyn Harper was calm and polite. The crew, specifically Brenda Collins and Gary Mitchell, were aggressive and unprofessional. I have in my possession a video and audio recording that contradicts their public claims. I seek no compensation or attention. I only want the truth to prevail. Please advise how to proceed." A hush fell over the room. Benjamin read it again, slowly, as if to confirm the words were real. He opened the attachment. A short clip played. Gary Mitchell's voice boomed clearly, "Move or be removed from the flight." The lawyers leaned forward, eyes wide. Isabella's mouth parted. Even Marcus's expression shifted, the faintest flicker of relief crossing his face. "Who is this Leo Martinez?" Benjamin murmured. "Law student," Isabella said quickly, already typing his name into her phone. "Georgetown, clean record, no signs of a stunt. This looks real." Marcus leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. For the first time in days, the knot in his chest eased. "The truth," he said quietly, "has arrived." The conference room was cold, its fluorescent lights humming faintly above polished oak. On one side of the table sat Brenda Collins and Gary Mitchell, flanked by their lawyer, Richard Harmon. Brenda's hands were folded tightly, knuckles pale, while Gary wore a mask of professional calm that didn't quite conceal the twitch of his jaw. Cameras and microphones dotted the room. A stenographer tapped keys with mechanical precision, every word immortalized. On the other side sat Marcus Harper, tall and composed, dressed in a charcoal suit. He looked less like a defendant and more like a judge. Beside him was Benjamin Carter, his litigator, flipping calmly through a binder thick with notes. At Marcus's other side sat Isabella Rossi, silent but alert, her eyes sharp as knives. Harmon began the deposition with the confidence of a man convinced he could bend truth with volume alone. His questions came rapid fire, meant to corner Marcus, to paint him as reckless. "Mr. Harper," Harmon said, his voice rich with practiced indignation, "would you agree that your text message to Ascend Airlines CEO was, in fact, a demand that 2 long-serving employees be terminated on the spot?" Marcus's face was unreadable. It was not a demand. It was a statement of consequence. Harmon smirked. "Statement of consequence. That's a convenient phrase. Isn't it true that you threatened to terminate a multi-million-dollar contract unless the airline did your bidding?" Marcus leaned forward slightly, his voice quiet but cutting. "What I did was inform Mr. Grant of the consequences of his employees' actions. My mother was forced from her seat, humiliated, and threatened with removal from the flight. That is a breach of service to her as a customer. Their conduct also violated provisions in my company's contract with Ascend, provisions concerning professionalism and operational competence. I simply made clear what would follow if the situation was not corrected." The room was silent for a beat. Even the stenographer's tapping seemed to slow. Harmon's smirk faltered, but he pressed on. "So you do admit you used your position and your company's power to have my clients removed?" Marcus's dark eyes lifted to meet his directly. "I admit I used my voice to protect my mother. If your clients had done their jobs with dignity and respect, I would not have needed to." Brenda shifted in her seat, heat rising in her cheeks. She had spent weeks in the media painting herself as the victim. Now, sitting across from Marcus Harper, she felt suddenly exposed, as though he could see through every layer of performance. Harmon, sensing the tension, shifted tactics. He flipped open a folder and slid a document across the table. "Mr. Harper, are you aware of my client, Ms. Collins's sworn statement? In it, she attests that your mother became hostile, used profanity, and threw her boarding pass at her." Benjamin Carter arched an eyebrow. "Sworn statement," he repeated dryly. "Under oath." "Yes," Harmon snapped. Marcus's gaze turned to Brenda for the first time. He held her eyes, calm and unblinking. I am aware of her lies. Harmon pounded the table. Objection. You cannot call my client a liar in this proceeding. Benjamin leaned back in his chair, lips curling into the faintest smile. Actually, Rick, he can, and we can prove it. The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Brenda's face paled. Gary shifted uncomfortably. Benjamin nodded toward his associate at the far end of the table. The lights dimmed slightly as a monitor flickered to life. "Ladies and gentlemen," Benjamin said, his voice smooth, "we would like to introduce Exhibit A." The video began to play, grainy, slightly angled, but unmistakable. Evelyn Harper sat in seat 2A, calm, her voice soft but steady. She explained she wished to remain in the seat her son had purchased. Brenda's smile hardened. Bethany Sterling's voice drifted in, dripping with condescension. "It's just a seat." Gary Mitchell loomed, his voice sharp. Move or be removed from the flight. The audio was pristine. Every word echoed through the room like a verdict. There was no profanity, no aggression from Evelyn, only grace, restraint, and quiet dignity. Then the footage showed her walk down the aisle, her head bowed, her book clutched tightly as she sank into seat 4D. When the video ended, the silence was suffocating. Harmon's face drained of color. He opened his mouth, but no words came. Brenda's hands trembled visibly, her throat constricting as if she couldn't breathe. Gary stared at the table, jaw slack. Benjamin's smile widened just slightly. "This," he said, gesturing toward the dark screen, "is the truth. Your client swore under oath that Mrs. Harper was hostile, that she cursed, that she threw her boarding pass. The evidence proves otherwise, that Mr. Harmon is called perjury." Harmon sputtered. This is inadmissible. It's direct evidence." Benjamin cut in smoothly. "And it is devastating to your case. I strongly suggest you withdraw this lawsuit before we pursue countersuits for defamation and before the district attorney pursues charges for lying under oath." The stenographer typed furiously. Every word recorded. Brenda's eyes darted to Harmon, her breath shallow. I didn't. I was just enough," Gary muttered, his voice low, his face gray. He ran a hand over his jaw, suddenly looking years older. Harmon leaned in, whispering furiously to his clients, but the damage was irreversible. The lie had been exposed, not by Marcus's wealth, not by Nexus Innovations' power, but by the quiet courage of one passenger who had chosen to bear witness, on the far side of the country, in his modest apartment. Leo Martinez sat staring at his phone. Benjamin Carter's voice still rang in his ears from the call earlier. "Martinez, you have done something extraordinary. You may have just saved this case." Leo had expected relief. Instead, he felt a knot of fear. His anonymity was gone. He had stepped into the spotlight he had desperately tried to avoid. His name would soon surface. The world would know who had provided the video. He thought again of his grandfather's words. "Silence in the face of a lie makes you a partner to it." For weeks, he had nearly partnered with the lie. But now, finally, he had chosen otherwise. In the conference room, Marcus turned his gaze back to Brenda. His voice was quiet, almost gentle, but it cut deeper than any shout. "You underestimated my mother, you underestimated me, and you underestimated the truth. That was your mistake." Brenda lowered her eyes, her body trembling. She had played the victim on television, but in this room, stripped of her performance, she looked small. Benjamin gathered his papers with crisp precision. "This deposition is over. Mr. Harmon, we expect your withdrawal notice by end of day." The lawyers rose, the cameras clicked off, and the battle that had dominated headlines for weeks ended not with a bang, but with the undeniable weight of truth. For Marcus, it wasn't victory he felt, it was relief. For Evelyn, for every time she had swallowed disrespect in silence. For the quiet dignity she carried that deserved, finally, to be defended. The headlines shifted overnight, where once Brenda Collins and Gary Mitchell had been portrayed as martyrs. The tide turned with brutal speed. Clips from the deposition leaked not the entire video, but enough. A few damning seconds of Gary's ultimatum, his voice sharp, move or be removed. Enough of Brenda's condescending tone to undo every tear she had shed on television. Public sympathy evaporated. The GoFundMe that had ballooned past $200,000 was abruptly frozen. Donors demanded refunds. Comment sections that once defended them now filled with fury. "You lied. You smeared an old woman for sympathy. Disgusting." Within days, Ascend Airlines quietly submitted reports to the Federal Aviation Administration. The footage had been entered into evidence, and the airline claimed it constituted a violation of crew conduct regulations. Brenda and Gary's flight attendant certifications were suspended indefinitely. Industry whispers spread quickly no airline would touch them. They weren't simply unemployed, they were untouchable. Brenda took a cashier job at a discount store in Hawthorne. She wore the blue apron of her new uniform with the same rigidity she once carried in her flight attendant's jacket. But now her smile was forced, her movements mechanical. Customers passed her without noticing. She was invisible in the very way she had once tried to make Evelyn Harper feel. Gary, bitter and adrift, tried to leverage old connections with regional airlines, one by one. The calls ended in awkward silences, then polite refusals. His years of service, his once proud reputation, crumbled into dust. He ended up working nights as a warehouse supervisor, his authority reduced to scanning pallets and signing off on deliveries. The weight of his lost prestige pressed on him like an anchor. Captain David Foster fared little better. While he had not been the instigator, the investigation revealed his failure of command. He had threatened Evelyn with removal based solely on his purser's word, never once speaking to her himself. In the eyes of regulators, that was negligence. His license was suspended pending review, facing disgrace. He chose early retirement. A 25-year career ended not with applause, but with silence. And then there were the Sterlings. For Bethany and Robert, the fallout was social, not professional. The video exposed their arrogance. Bethany's dismissive sighs, her remark, "It's just a seat." Within hours, clips of her words circulated across social media, often paired with captions dripping with scorn. "It's just a seat," says the woman dripping in diamonds, while an old teacher is humiliated. Bethany's face became a meme, her condescending expression plastered over internet jokes. But for her, it wasn't funny. Charity boards on which she sat quietly asked for her resignation. Invitations to social events dried up. Her carefully cultivated reputation as a philanthropist and community leader disintegrated. Robert Sterling's boutique investment firm lost clients overnight. Wealthy families and small businesses alike pulled their accounts, unwilling to be associated with the scandal. The phone calls came in terse and apologetic. "It's not personal, Robert, but we can't risk the optics." His office emptied. The phones grew silent, and soon he was left staring at balance sheets that no longer added up. The collapse of their social standing was slower than Brenda and Gary's professional ruin, but no less devastating. They became pariahs in the very circles they once believed belonged to them. Meanwhile, across the country, Leo Martinez's life shifted in the opposite direction. He hadn't wanted fame, he hadn't wanted recognition, but Benjamin Carter had insisted on acknowledging him. The world deserves to know that someone chose courage when silence would have been easier, the litigator had said. Leo's email inbox exploded. Law professors sent congratulations. Students whispered his name with admiration. Human rights organizations reached out, inviting him to apply for internships. And then Marcus Harper called him directly. The voice on the other end was deep, steady, and warmer than Leo expected. "Mr. Martinez, this is Marcus Harper. I wanted to thank you, personally, for what you did." Leo swallowed hard. "I only did what was right, sir. You did what was brave." Marcus replied, "And bravery deserves recognition." In the weeks that followed, Marcus arranged for Leo's remaining tuition to be covered through a fellowship funded by Nexus Innovations. More than that, he established a new program at UCLA Law, in Leo's name a fellowship dedicated to advancing human rights in aviation and corporate accountability. Benjamin Carter extended an offer as well. "When you're ready, we want you at Cromwell and Swain," he said. "You've already shown the instincts of a litigator. Now, let's teach you the craft." For Leo, it felt surreal. One act of recording, one decision not to stay silent, had changed the trajectory of his life. And what of Evelyn Harper weeks after the deposition? She sat in her modest garden, sunlight warming her skin as bees drifted lazily over roses. The chaos of the past months felt distant here. The city's noise could not reach her, nor the flashing cameras, nor the angry words of strangers who had never met her. Marcus sat across from her, a glass of sweet tea in his hand. He was quieter than usual, his tall frame relaxed in the wicker chair. For once, he was not CEO, not strategist, not fighter. He was simply her son. "I saw her," Evelyn said softly, breaking the silence. Marcus turned his head. "Who, Brenda?" "On the local news. They did a 'Where Are They Now' piece. She's working at a store in Hawthorne." Evelyn's eyes lingered on the roses, their petals vibrant red against the green. She looked tired, smaller somehow. Marcus said nothing. Evelyn sighed. "I don't feel good about it. I never wanted anyone to lose their livelihood. A man's career as a pilot, gone. A woman's dignity, gone. It feels heavy. Marcus, too heavy." Marcus set his glass down and leaned forward, taking her hand gently in his. "Mom, you have more grace in your little finger than they had in their entire beings. But this was never about punishing them. It was about accountability. What they did to you, they've done to others in smaller ways, to people who had no voice, no power. If there had been no consequences, it would have been like telling the world it was acceptable. Sometimes," he paused, searching her eyes, "to protect the garden, you have to pull the weeds out by the root." Evelyn's throat tightened. She looked at her son, at the boy she had raised in a small apartment with little more than love and determination. And she saw the man he had become, strong, patient, relentless in defense of her dignity. She nodded slowly. "But pulling weeds isn't enough. You have to plant something better in their place." Marcus smiled, warm this time. "That's why I wanted to tell you something in person." He explained that Nexus Innovations, in partnership with Ascend Airlines, had developed a new training program. Not just another slideshow on diversity, not empty words, but immersive scenario-based training using virtual reality. Employees would step into the shoes of passengers different ages, backgrounds, ethnicities, and experience the sting of implicit bias firsthand. "They're calling it the Evelyn Harper Dignity Initiative," Marcus said softly. "Your name, Mom. It'll launch next month. 6 airlines and 3 hotel chains are already signed on." Tears welled in Evelyn's eyes. For all the pain, for all the humiliation, something new was blooming, a legacy not of scorn, but of understanding. The quiet collapse of Brenda, Gary, David, and the Sterlings was not the end of the story. The true ending was here, in this garden, in the seeds planted for dignity that would outlast them all. The autumn sun slanted across Evelyn Harper's garden, painting the roses in hues of crimson and gold. Their petals were beginning to curl, surrendering to the season, yet their fragrance was still strong, defiant. Evelyn sat in her wicker chair, the same one she had occupied for years, her back cushioned by a floral pillow. She wore a soft cardigan, her hair silver in the sunlight. In her lap rested a letter she had already read 3 times, each word striking her heart with both weight and warmth. It was from Leo Martinez. His handwriting was careful, almost hesitant, as though each word was chosen with reverence. "Mrs. Harper, I don't expect you to remember me, but I was seated in 4C the day they forced you out of your seat. I saw what happened. I saw the grace with which you endured it. That day changed me. It showed me that justice isn't abstract. It's not just laws in a textbook. It's the defense of dignity in the smallest, quietest moments. I will carry that lesson for the rest of my career." Evelyn pressed the paper to her chest, her throat tightening. She had not set out to teach lessons anymore. Those years were behind her. But here, somehow, life had offered her one last student. The sound of footsteps drew her gaze up. Marcus crossed the lawn, tall and composed, but here in the garden his shoulders were softer. He carried 2 mugs of tea, steam curling into the cool air. "Sweet tea," he said simply, handing her one. "Just the way you like it." Evelyn smiled faintly. "You've been practicing." "I had a good teacher," he replied, sinking into the chair opposite her. For a while, they drank in silence, the only sound the distant buzz of bees and the occasional rustle of leaves. It was Evelyn who finally broke it. "I've been thinking," she said quietly, "about Brenda, about Gary, even the Sterlings. Their fall feels heavy. I never wanted lives to be destroyed." Marcus leaned forward, his dark eyes steady on hers. "You didn't destroy their lives, Mom. They destroyed their own. All you did was hold a mirror up to them. The truth did the rest." Evelyn's fingers tightened on her mug. "But truth can be cruel. Marcus, I don't want my name to be tied only to punishment." Marcus set his mug down, his voice softening. "It isn't." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a sleek folder, placing it gently on the table between them. The embossed letters read, "The Evelyn Harper Dignity Initiative." Evelyn's brows furrowed as she traced the words with trembling fingers. "It launches next month," Marcus explained. "Ascend Airlines is our first partner, but 5 other airlines and 3 hotel chains have already signed on. It's not just another seminar or slideshow, it's immersive. Employees will step into simulated experiences, virtual reality, that lets them feel what it's like to be dismissed, profiled, belittled. It's about empathy, about teaching them what dignity means, not in theory, but in lived experience. Evelyn's eyes brimmed with tears. "You put my name on this." Marcus smiled, a warmth breaking through the steel of his usual composure. "Your name deserves to stand for more than what they tried to do to you. It deserves to stand for change." She exhaled, long and shaky, a mixture of pride and sorrow for all the humiliation she had endured. This legacy was the answer. Not revenge, but planting seeds for a better world. Marcus sat back, his gaze softening. "Do you remember when I was 12, and I came home furious because a teacher accused me of cheating, just because I finished the test too quickly?" Evelyn chuckled, nodding. "You stormed into the kitchen like a hurricane. I thought you'd knock over the spice rack. You told me," Marcus said, his voice quiet but firm. "Son, sometimes the fight isn't about proving them wrong. It's about proving yourself right, over and over, until no one can deny it. That's what you gave me. That's why I built everything I did. And now I want the world to learn the same lesson from you." Evelyn's throat tightened. She blinked rapidly, dabbing at her eyes with the edge of her sleeve. "I just wanted to fly to see my son receive an award," she whispered. Marcus leaned forward, his hand covering hers. "And instead, you inspired something greater than any award I could ever win." Silence settled between them again, but it was not heavy. It was full of memory, of gratitude, of love. Later that week, Marcus stood on a stage in New York City. The event was small, not one of his typical glitzy product launches. The backdrop was simple, bearing only the words, "The Evelyn Harper Dignity Initiative." Executives from Ascend Airlines sat in the front row, along with representatives from other industries. Cameras flashed, reporters scribbled, but Marcus ignored the noise. His voice was steady, his words deliberate. "My mother raised me on a teacher's salary," he began. "She taught me that dignity isn't something anyone can give you, it's something you already have. What others can do is honor it or trample it. Too often, in too many industries, dignity has been neglected. What happened on Flight 451 was not unique. It was simply visible, and visibility demands response." He gestured to the screen behind him, where images flickered of ordinary people in VR headsets, their faces registering shock, sadness, and recognition as they stepped into digital simulations. "This initiative is not about blame," Marcus continued. "It's about understanding. It's about ensuring no passenger, no customer, no human being is ever made to feel small simply because someone else believed they could. We owe one another respect. We owe one another humanity. And this is just the beginning." The audience rose in applause, the sound echoing through the hall. Cameras captured Marcus's composed smile, but off stage, Evelyn watched quietly, her heart swelling. She had never wanted the spotlight, but here she was, her name standing for something greater than herself. Back in his dorm room, Leo Martinez watched the live stream on his laptop. His heart thudded as Marcus spoke the words he himself had been grappling with since that flight. Dignity. Humanity. Truth. Leo opened his notebook, flipping to a page where he had scrawled a draft of his letter. He wrote slowly, carefully, his pen pressing firmly into the paper. "Mr. Harper, I wanted you to know that your mother's strength gave me mine. Watching her that day reminded me of my grandmother, who faced quiet indignities with the same grace. I almost stayed silent, afraid of the cost, but silence would have made me complicit. Your mother's dignity gave me courage, and her courage has set me on my path. Whatever I do in my career, it will be rooted in that moment. Justice is not abstract. It is defending dignity when it is under attack. That is a lesson I carry forward. He signed his name at the bottom, setting down his pen. For the first time in weeks, his chest felt light. In Evelyn Harper's garden, the roses swayed gently in the evening breeze. She touched a petal, soft and fragile, yet vibrant. It would wither soon, but she knew others would bloom in its place. That was the way of life. One moment ending, another beginning, and now, her name, her story would bloom long after she was gone. The garden was quiet, as it often was in late afternoon. The roses, though beginning to fade, still carried their fragrance in the air. Evelyn Harper sat at her small wrought iron table, a journal open before her. She wrote, not because she needed to record events those had already been etched into the memory of millions, but because words had always been her refuge. Her hand moved slowly, but steadily. Dignity is not something you demand. It is something you hold, even when others try to strip it from you. That is what I learned again on Flight 451, and that is what my son taught the world in the weeks that followed. She paused, tapping the pen against the page. She remembered the moment they made her stand, the eyes of strangers on her back, the humiliating walk to the cramped middle seat. She remembered the sting in her chest, the tears she would not let fall, and she remembered, too, the calm resolve that filled her son's voice when he told her afterward, "This isn't about a seat. It's about respect." Marcus stepped into the garden, his tall frame softened by the light. He carried 2 cups of tea, steam curling gently into the cool air. He set one before her, then settled into the chair opposite. "You're writing again," he said, nodding to the journal. "Old habits," Evelyn replied with a faint smile. "When I don't write, my thoughts tangle. Writing straightens them out." He studied her face, noting the calm there, the same calm she had carried through storms much greater than a flight gone wrong. "What are you writing about?" She met his eyes, about dignity, about what it means to hold on to it when others try to take it away. Marcus leaned back, his gaze lifting to the sky where streaks of orange and pink began to spread. "It's a lesson the world needed to hear. Not just about you, about everyone who's been made to feel small." Evelyn closed her journal gently. But the world also needs to know that accountability isn't the same as revenge. Brenda, Gary, the Sterlings, they've faced consequences, but I don't take joy in their pain. What I want, Marcus, is for people to understand, so it doesn't happen again. Marcus nodded slowly. That's what the initiative is for. It won't erase what happened, but it will plant seeds. Seeds grow. Mom, even if we don't see the full bloom, they'll grow. Evelyn's lips curved into a soft smile. "You sound like a teacher." He chuckled. "I had the best one." They sat together in silence for a while, the clinking of cups the only sound. Evelyn thought of Leo Martinez, the law student who had carried the truth in secret, who had struggled with fear, but who had chosen to act. His letter still rested in her nightstand, folded carefully. She had read it so many times that the paper was beginning to soften at the edges. "He reminds me of you," Evelyn said suddenly. Marcus glanced at her. "Leo." "Yes," she said firmly. The same quiet fire, the same patience, but he needed a moment to see it in himself. You gave him that moment just by being who you are, just by standing up for me. Marcus shook his head gently. He gave himself that moment. He didn't stay silent. That was his choice, and it changed everything, miles away. Leo sat at his desk, surrounded by stacks of casebooks. His email inbox still buzzed with messages from professors, peers, and even strangers who had followed the story. But he ignored the noise. Instead, he focused on his coursework with a renewed determination. He wasn't just chasing prestige anymore. He had a purpose. The clip he had recorded was no longer just a file on his laptop. It was a symbol. Proof that one voice, one witness could shift the tide. He had stepped into the light reluctantly, but now he embraced it. He imagined his grandmother's proud smile, imagined her telling him, "You did what was right. That's what matters." For Leo, the path was clear now. His career in law would not be about climbing ladders for wealth or recognition. It would be about defending the small, the quiet, the overlooked people like Evelyn Harper, who deserved to sit in dignity without fear of being stripped of it. The ripples of Flight 451 continued outward. For Brenda Collins and Gary Mitchell, the world had turned cold. For Bethany and Robert Sterling, the glittering circles they once adored now closed their doors. For Captain Foster, years of pride had dissolved into quiet regret. But for Evelyn, Marcus, and Leo, the story had become something more than humiliation and scandal. It had become a testament. Weeks later, Marcus stood on a stage in Washington, unveiling the Evelyn Harper Dignity Initiative to a packed hall. Reporters filled the back rows, executives the front, but his words were not for them. They were for the unseen millions who had once been passengers, shoppers, clients, or students, people who had carried silent wounds from casual disrespect. "My mother taught me that respect is not optional," he told the crowd. "It is the baseline of humanity." Too often, industries forget that. Too often, people forget. The initiative is not about punishing the past. It is about shaping the future. It is about ensuring that no person, anywhere, is made to feel small when they deserve to feel seen. When he finished, the applause was long and unbroken. Cameras flashed, headlines churned, but Marcus's gaze searched for one face in the front row. Evelyn sat quietly, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes brimming with tears. Later that night, as the city lights shimmered outside Marcus's penthouse windows, Evelyn stood by the glass, watching the traffic below. She spoke softly, almost to herself. "Do you think they'll really learn Marcus joined her at the window, slipping his arm around her shoulders? Some will, some won't. But we have to try. That's the only way the garden grows." Evelyn leaned against him, the weight of the past months finally softening into peace. "Then we'll plant together." And so they did. The story of Flight 451 was not just about an elderly woman forced from her seat. It was about a truth that refused to stay buried, a son who refused to let disrespect go unanswered, a witness who refused to stay silent, and a legacy that refused to fade. It was a reminder that dignity is not a luxury seat in first class. It is the right of every human being. And when that dignity is threatened, it deserves defenders. The quiet power of Evelyn Harper's grace had toppled lies, reshaped policies, and ignited a movement. not through shouting, not through rage, but through patience, courage, and truth. As autumn deepened into winter, the roses in her garden withered, their petals falling softly to the earth. But Evelyn knew new buds would bloom in spring, and in that cycle she saw her story mirrored humiliation giving way to honor, silence giving way to truth, and seeds of dignity planted for generations yet to come. And so, Evelyn Harper's journey reminds us of something far greater than a seat on an airplane. It reminds us that dignity is not a privilege reserved for the wealthy or powerful. It is a right that belongs to every human being. The flight crew who tried to strip her of that dignity faced the consequences of their choices. The entitled passengers who believed they owned the cabin learned what it means to be humbled. And yet, Evelyn's response was never about revenge. It was about respect, about drawing a line so that no one else would suffer in silence. Her son, Marcus, turned humiliation into change, building the Evelyn Harper Dignity Initiative so that future travelers, customers, and ordinary people will be seen, not dismissed. And Leo Martinez, a young law student, found the courage to speak when silence would have been easier, proving that truth has power, even in the hands of one witness. The story leaves us with a question when we see injustice. Will we have the courage to act, or will we look away? If this story touched you, let it be a reminder respect costs nothing, but its absence can cost everything. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel, so you never miss the next story that challenges, inspires, and makes you think.